Dear all, in this presentation, I will give an overview of early Western manual printmaking techniques and their developments until the 19th century. Let us start with a summary and an early chronology of graphic techniques, after which you will see plenty of historical examples. Early Western manual printmaking, see the first row, can be divided into three main techniques. Column 1, relief printmaking, such as woodcut and engraving. Column 2, intaglio printmaking, such as engraving and etching. And column 3, planographic printmaking, such as lithography. Some other processes were also used, see column 4, but they mostly did not develop much. After the introduction of photography in the 1830s, this process was combined with printmaking, see the second row, which led to the development of many hundreds of new graphic processes. Most were only short-lived, but, for example, offset printing is still in common use. A variety of materials, see the third row, was used for making blocks and plates. Well known are, column 1, wood blocks cut along the grain with knives and gouges for woodcuts. Column 2, copper plates for engraving. And column 3, chalk sandstone blocks for lithography. The last row demonstrates that different supports and inks were used and that special printmaking presses were developed for each printmaking technique. Color could be applied to a print by brush or with stencils, and a number of color printing processes were developed. Prints were available as single sheets in volume or as book illustrations. All printmaking techniques have their forerunners, so-called antecedents. They start in prehistory, with hands dipped in paints and pressed against cave walls, and with simple designs scratched in shells and stones. Later on we find stamps, small blocks with a design cut into them that were pressed into soft materials, such as clay or dough. Metal objects were decorated with designs scratched, chiseled, or engraved into their surfaces, and in a more refined way, chemicals were used to corrode these metals. Early decoration of fabric and other supports, printed by means of stamps dipped in paint, appeared in a few places around the world. A continuous development of stamping fabric seems to have started in northwest India around 400 BCE. From there, it will first have spread eastward, with stamps on fabric found in China around 100 BCE. Printing woodcuts with ornaments, texts, and images on paper appeared in China from the latter 7th century onward, spreading further through Eastern Asia. In Korea, woodblock printing developed to letterpress with metal type in the 13th century. Spreading westward, stamping fabric appeared in Western Asia and Egypt around the 6th century CE. From Egypt it moved to Italy in the 13th, 14th century, and from there to Central Europe and England in the 15th century. The first German woodcuts printed on paper appeared in the early 15th century and letterpress from metal type in the middle of the 15th century. Intaglio printing by means of engraving copper plates and printing these on paper developed in southwest Germany from the 1430s, after which it spread over the rest of Europe. It was practiced in Japan around 1600 and in Mexico and Peru a few decades later. I will begin the overview with relief printmaking, the oldest of printmaking techniques. It concerns cutting out from a woodblock everything what not should be printed. The remaining surface of the block was inked and pressed against a support, such as textile, leather, living skin, or paper, to make an impression. Covering stamps or objects with paint or ink and pressing them against a surface is of all places and times. Hands dipped in paint and pressed against a rock wall are commonly found on all continents from prehistory. Seals were rolled in clay as a mark of the author of a text or owner of an object in the Middle East. Producer marks were pressed in dough or clay with wooden stamps in Rome, Egypt, Byzantium, and the manner was also introduced in Germany around the year 1000. It shows that the concept of making a woodcut was known in Europe in the Middle Ages. Overland and oversea trade routes from the east of Asia to Africa and Europe, and back also, developed from more than 3,000 years ago. Together they are known as the Silk Route. Objects and materials were traded along these routes, and they allowed people and ideas to travel up and down. As mentioned, the stamping of fabric seems to show a continuous development from northwest India in the 4th century BCE, moving eastward and westward. Regarding spreading westward, on the left a piece of cotton from the Sasanian Empire in Western Asia from the 3rd to 7th century CE, stamped in black and red, with gold dust applied onto a sticky layer. On the right, a piece of Egyptian cotton from the 6th, 7th century CE, stamped in black with additional red coloring. From Egypt, the stamping of fabric moved to Italy and up north in the 14th century, developing further with designs and patterns becoming more complex. Characteristic of European stamping of fabric is the use of color inks. See the examples shown. Also, over 100 medieval color ink recipes for stamping fabric are documented. The earliest European instructions on making woodblocks for printing fabric, preparing inks, inking, and stamping were compiled by the Italian craftsman Cennino Cennini in his manual Il Libro dell'Arte, written in Padua shortly before the 15th century. His description is similar to the traditional form of the stamps and working manners still used in northwest India, shown here. Chinese Buddhist texts in the form of single-leaf prints and book rolls printed from woodcuts survive from the second half of the 7th century CE. Shown here is an 8th century complete book roll with the text of a Dharani Sutra. This image shows the first Chinese illustrated book with a clear date in the year 868 CE. Some experiments were made in China printing ceramic movable type in the middle of the 11th century. However, the first successful letterpress manner developed in Korea in the 13th century using bronze movable type. Shown is the oldest surviving example from 1377, known as Jikji. The printing was carried out by covering the typeface with ink, placing a sheet of paper on top of it, and rubbing the reverse of the sheet. This process was used until the 19th century and occasionally also applied in China and Japan. The process was never mechanized. The Uyghurs, living in Central Asia, had their own alphabetical script and were capable of printing with wooden type. Mongol hordes raided Asia from the Pacific coast all the way to Eastern Europe in the 13th century. They were illiterate and for their administration used Uyghurs who could read, write, and also print texts. Through them also, woodblock printing may have been introduced in Europe. From the 9th to the 15th century, strips of paper stamped with ornaments and Islamic prayers were produced in Western Asia and Egypt. It is uncertain who were responsible for these prints, but it is considered they were made by wandering tribes coming from northwest India. In the early 15th century, they wandered further through northern Africa into Spain, and through the Balkan into Central Europe. These wandering tribes, some now also known as Roma, reached southern Germany in 1417. The first German woodcuts, such as the ones shown, are dated in the same period, and their connection with Roma is under discussion. The blocks were printed with black ink, and some impressions were also hand-colored. Johann Gutenberg is credited with the development of letterpress using movable tintype in Germany from the 1440s, which is about 2 centuries after the start of Korean letterpress. The printing was carried out by covering the typeface with ink, placing a sheet of paper on top of it, and pressing it against the type by means of a machine, a book printing press. Gutenberg produced his first book, the Latin Bible shown here, in the early 1450s. Gutenberg's letterpress process spread rapidly throughout Europe in the 15th century and was soon combined with woodcut imagery. Woodblocks and type could be joined in one printing form and inked and printed together. The style of woodcut designs developed gradually throughout the 15th century, from fluid lines to angular lines, more and more including hatching and shading. After 1500, the German artist Albrecht Dürer was of great influence when he introduced a style of Italian Renaissance art being more naturalistic, including light and shade to suggest space and volume. Designs of great artists combined with high technical skills of woodcutters created the best woodcuts in the 16th and early 17th century. Copper engraving and etching allowed for finer detail and superseded woodcut gradually after 1600. Woodcut as a printmaking technique was never gone, though. Technically seen, woodcuts were made by cutting planks along the grain by means of knives and gouges. From about 1775, the English engraver Thomas Bewick introduced woodblocks sawn across the grain in a new process called wood engraving. He could create much finer lines and more subtle tonalities than in woodcuts by engraving with a buren, a tool common in metal engraving, which tool will be discussed later on. Wood engraving became popular soon enough. It was suited for creating finely detailed designs, and the blocks could be printed in combination with letterpress text in editions of tens of thousands. This was perfect for the production of popular books and magazines that were published throughout the 19th century. Although the majority of prints were in black only, color printing has always been important. It covered an estimated 1 to 3% of early print production, depending on subject and print shop. The first European color print relief printing process was printing fabric in the 14th century, as already discussed. The earliest European woodcuts printed on paper were in black ink only. Color relief printing on paper appeared from the middle of the 15th century. Gutenberg tried printing a few lines in red in his first book. See the line of red text heading the first column in the upper example. His followers mastered color printing texts and ornaments soon enough. Notice the decorated initial B on the left, which we will see again at the end of this talk. Erhard Radolt was born in Augsburg in southern Germany and trained as book printer. He moved to Venice in the early 1470s, where he managed a print shop. His publications were distinguished by color-printed ornamentation. From 1482, Radolt produced works on astronomy that included diagrams printed in 2 or even 3 colors. The technique concerned printing a woodcut in black and overprinting it with 1 or 2 colors. It should be seen as a form of mechanized hand coloring. After his return to Augsburg in 1486, he further refined his color printing technique using up to 4 colors depicting human figures. 2 decades later, the German artist Lucas Cranach invented a new color printing process. He colored white paper with blue paint, upon which he printed a woodblock in black. He printed the highlights and reflections of the design either in gold ink or in white ink on top of this. Copies of Cranach's prints reached the artist Hans Burgmeier in Augsburg. Burgmeier understood Cranach's working manner, copied it, and developed it further. His own invention, on the left, concerned overprinting a first impression in black ink with a second impression in a color ink. This was similar to how Radolt had worked. However, he added cutting out the highlights from this second woodblock to show the white of the paper instead of printing the highlights with a lighter ink. A few years later, Burgmeier devised how to print with 3 blocks. See the example on the right. Each block held only part of the design, but together they created the complete image. Within a few years, this second concept was adopted and further developed in Italy. Together with the Italian artistic style of working in stronger contrast, so-called chiaroscuro woodcuts were created. Chiaroscuro woodcuts had their heyday in the 16th century and were also created in the Netherlands and France then. The fashion for chiaroscuro woodcuts dwindled in the second quarter of the 17th century. It was revived in the 18th century, following which the French block cutter Jean-Michel Papillon also published the first detailed description of the technique, illustrated with the 5 prints shown here. Impression 1 is the green background with the highlights cut from the wood block to show the white of the paper. Impressions 2 and 3 show the brown halftones, and impression 4 the darkest shades. For the image on the right, all blocks were printed in register over each other, showing the complete image. The English artist John Baptist Jackson was one of the most prominent chiaroscuro printmakers of the 18th century. He used the technique for large images and for wallpaper. Contrary to relief printing, intaglio printmaking concerns cutting out everything what must be printed. Ink is rubbed into the grooves and the plate surface cleaned. In printing, paper is forced into the grooves and against the ink to make an impression. The production of intaglio printing plates can be divided into mechanical techniques, such as engraving discussed here first, and chemical techniques, such as etching discussed thereafter. Examples of designs with incised lines in shells or rock go back to prehistory. Historical metal objects decorated with incised lines are commonly found. Various techniques could be used, one of which is engraving. A particular tool used for engraving is the so-called buren. A buren is a steel rod of diamond section set in a handle. Its further end is cut obliquely to create a sharp point where the 3 sides meet. The engraver pushes this tip forward through the plate's surface to create V-shaped grooves. Burens were used for fine decoration in soft metals. Early traces of its use can be found in objects from around the east of the Mediterranean Sea and Italy. Notice in the image on the right the triangular mark pushed in the side of a crossing groove, which indicates the shape of the tip of the engraving tool. Instructions for making burens of diamond, square, and round sections are found in a German manuscript of the first quarter of the 12th century. See the diagram on the left. On the right are examples of German engraved decoration plates from about the same period. In the 1430s, the so-called master of the playing cards invented inking the grooves of an engraved copper plate and printing it on paper. He engraved devotional prints and playing cards, hence his provisional name. The examples show the same design of a playing card, one in reverse to the other. Again, the German artist Albrecht Dürer was of great influence. His engravings depict the textures of wood, stone, glass, textile, and fur, and, most important, light and shade to suggest perspective and volume. Dürer's working manner paved the way for many engravers after him. They engraved hatching patterns with delicate swelling and curving lines to create fine shades, which was not possible in woodcut technically. From around 1600, intaglio printmaking took over the position of relief printmaking, with ever more refined working manners. Notice the spiraling line used to create the image on the left. The image on the right is created by rows of tiny triangular dashes. Manual engraving lost its prominence with the introduction of photomechanical techniques in the 19th century, but engraving is still practiced by artists today. The second main manner of intaglio printmaking is by means of etching using chemicals to corrode the metal printing plate. The chemical treatment of stones and shells is found from prehistory. The example in the middle shows the basics of etching. A design of a lizard was painted with a resist, perhaps pitch, on the inside of a shell. When acrid fruit juice or vinegar is poured into the shell, the acid will dissolve the chalk around the image. After washing out the shell and removing the resist, a shallow relief will appear. This slide shows marks etched in the base of a Chinese bronze vessel from about the 3rd century BCE. Celtic smiths, active in Central Europe in the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, understood the etching of geometrical patterns in iron sword blades and spearheads. The examples show that the edges of the blades had been covered with a resist and the insides were etched to create shallow reliefs. Knowledge about etching disappeared in Roman times. The first example from the European Middle Ages is the etched lettering on a Spanish sword blade from about circa 1290. Dozens of recipes for etching iron and steel were documented in the 14th and 15th century, and many European blades with etched lettering or decoration from the period have survived. The decoration of arms and armor with etched designs became a trade of its own. One prominent craftsman in this field was Daniel Hopfer from Augsburg, to whom the etching on this armor is attributed. The example shows that the steel was covered with a resist, a so-called etching ground, and the design drawn with the needle through the ground, after which the design was bitten into the steel. Hopfer invented etching a design in a flat iron plate and printing it as a copper engraving. He made his first etch print in circa 1495, and other artists, including Dürer, also tried their hands on the technique. Etching and printing iron plates disappeared again circa 1540. For one reason, iron plates did corrode quickly and the rust could not be scraped off without damaging the design. Another reason was that burins of the period were not hard enough to further engrave iron plates to make corrections or add lines. The Dutch artist Lucas van Leyden combined etching and engraving in 6 plates, all dated 1520, such as this one. It is the combination of the two techniques that makes clear he must have worked on copper plates, because iron could not be engraved. On the right are a number of characteristics by which etching and engraving can be distinguished in the print, and consequently in all other engravings and etchings. This detail shows etched lines on the left of the blue divide. They can mainly be recognized because lines are drawn irregular and have blunt ends. The engraved lines on the right side are thinner, precisely cut, and have pointed ends. Etching became popular with painters because the technique could be learned in a day, while copper engraving took at least 4 years. The Dutch artist Rembrandt van Rijn was the great master of etching in the 17th century. His freedom of expression in the medium was an example for many artists worldwide up to the present day. Many other intelligent printmaking processes were developed based on engraving and etching. I will discuss a few whose inventors are known. The mezzotint technique, called so after the Italian word mezzo or half, was the first printmaking technique to create true halftones or shades. It was invented by the German soldier Ludwig von Siegen. The surface of the copper plate was roughened by moving a chisel-shaped tool with a serrated edge in a rocking movement over the plate. The pits and burrs made in this way held a little ink. They could be further manipulated by scraping and polishing to create different shades. A small steel wheel or roulette with a coarse thread was rolled over the plate's surface to create crayon lines of series of pits, an invention by French artist Jean-Charles François. In etching, halftones were created by dusting a copper plate with resin powder. This is the aquatint technique, called so because tints or tonalities were made with aqua fortis, a Latin phrase meaning strong water or acid. The plate was heated and the resin melted onto the plate in the shape of small drops. During etching, the metal around the resin drops was bitten. The longer the metal was etched, the deeper the grooves became. Thus, the more ink they could hold and the darker the impression would be. The aquatint technique was invented in Holland in the 1650s by the silversmith Jan van der Velde. It disappeared again after his death and was reinvented in France in the 1780s. It has been in use ever since, and over a dozen varieties of the process have been developed. As with woodcuts, the earliest European engravings were printed with black ink only. Color intaglio printing appeared from the 1460s. On the left is the earliest example of an intaglio color print. It is an engraving inked in white on black coated paper. More common was to print plates in monochromatic blue, brown, or red on white paper, which can be found through the ages since. Instead of printing with a color ink, impressions could be hand-colored, and plates could be printed on colored paper or fabric. Various manners of polychromatic intaglio color printing have been developed. The earliest example is this so-called volvel, a paper instrument with rotating dials used in astronomy. It shows how 3 impressions, the base plate in red and the 2 dials in black, were stitched together to create a composite print in 2 colors. This plate was inked in red and blue, instead of in black only. The process is called à la poupée inking in most languages. The French phrase refers to the use of a tiny inking ball or doll, poupée in French, to ink the plate locally. A copper plate could be cut up and the parts inked in different colors. They were joined again on the press and printed in one run to create a 2-color impression, which is called a jigsaw print. Lucas Cranach printed 2 woodblocks on blue colored paper to create an image with its highlights. Dutch artist Hercules Segers did the same in intaglio printing a century later. The Dutch military engineer Johannes Taylor invented a variety of à la poupée inking, an engraved or etched copper plate, in up to 10 colors circa 1685, as shown by this example. The manner kept in use ever since. Superimposing in register multiple blocks or plates inked in different colors was well known when Jacob Christophe Leblanc introduced a complete new printing technique. He overprinted 3 mezzotint plates inked with transparent inks in the primary colors blue, yellow, and red in this order on white paper. This is called trichromatic printing, after the 3 colors. Due to the ink's transparency, every desired color could be reproduced. The color proofs show how yellow over blue created greens. The detail in the lower right exemplifies how to create a complete spectrum of colors by overprinting blue, yellow, and red. Black and white could be added occasionally. Leblanc's process was also responsible for the high quality of French color prints of the second half of the 18th century. The depicted print has dots in the middle of the upper and lower margins. These are pinholes used in the registration of the plates when printing one color over the other on the same sheet. The detail on the left shows blue ink on the plate mark and yellow, red, and black ink around the pinhole. The German Alois Senefelder invented a completely new printmaking technique in 1796 to 1798. Senefelder drew with an oily crayon on a chalk sandstone. The unsaturated fatty acids in the crayon formed a strong chemical bond with the chalk. After preparation of the stone, its surface was dampened with water. The fatty drawing repelled the water, but accepted oil-based ink rolled over it, see the image. Paper was placed on the inked image and printed against it on a press. Characteristic for lithography, the design on the stone has no relief, that is, design and background are on the same plane. 2 main working manners were used in lithography. Left, drawing with an oily crayon stick, and right, drawing with a pen or brush with special drawing ink. The majority of lithographs were in black only, but soon enough Senefelder was also capable of printing with color printing inks. In 1818, Senefelder published a manual on his process, with a separate volume of examples of his lithographic technique. Perhaps as homage to the earlier color printers in letterpress, he created this 3-color print after the example we saw earlier in this presentation. The 1820s and 1830s saw a lot of experimentation in color lithography. The French printer Godefroy Engelmann patented trichromatic lithographic printing, similar to Leblanc's process. This so-called chromolithography caused the publication of a flood of color prints throughout the 19th and into the 20th century. The process developed to the present CMYK color system for offset and digital printing and color copying. Finishing my talk, I have to thank some people for supporting my research. And I thank you for your attention.